In this video, we're going to be looking at bias in education, specifically the effect race and ethnicity plays in the classroom. Bias in education occurs when one or more groups is treated differently from another group in the educational setting. There are multiple domains in which educational bias is present in the classroom. It should be noted that bias is not always intentional. One of the more prominent forms of educational bias is that of test bias, which refers to a systematic measurement error or an estimation related to the use of tests with two or more groups. Simply put, test bias occurs when one group is disproportionately favored over another group in regards to testing. It has been suggested that testing bias can be broken down into at least 5 possible varieties of racial bias: labeling bias, content bias, methodological bias, prediction bias, and selection system bias. Out of these 5 possible varieties, only labeling and content bias are considered to be significant, and the other 3 are only minimally important. Labeling bias occurs when a test claims to measure one thing, but is really measuring another thing altogether. This can be especially problematic when tests designed to measure intelligence or aptitude are used within the classroom, as these types of tests are now regarded by experts to measure developed abilities rather than innate skills or abilities. This can lead to students being assessed inaccurately, and potentially even being mislabeled within the classroom. Content bias occurs when questions on a test favor one group over another. This can occur when questions contain terms that are well known to one group but unknown to other groups due to differences in culture or background. An example of this would be the inclusion of the culturally marked term regatta within an SAT question. Since a regatta is an event more familiar to a Caucasian student than to an African American student due to cultural differences, inclusion of this term on a test is biased, as students unfamiliar with the term will be less likely to be able to answer the question that contains the term. Additionally, test question interpretation may differ depending on the language primarily used by the student, as not all students are native English speakers. And even if a student is a native speaker of English, they do not necessarily use the exact same sentence structure patterns as the dominant group, which can also lead to question misinterpretation. Given the potential biases that standardized tests may include, I think it's clear that there should be attempts to create tests that will not be biased against one group over another. Others have suggested this as well, and alternate testing instruments have been created to address this concern. Some alternative tests that have been developed include the Naglieri Nonverbal Ability Test, the Comprehensive Test of Nonverbal Intelligence, and the Black Intelligence Test of Cultural Homogeneity. Using these types of tests, students of all groups have been shown to score well within the normal range. If more tests like these are developed and implemented within schools, it would certainly level the playing field for all students. As most tests are normed using the scores of the majority group population, there is an inherent bias against minority groups. Any new test developed should include norming using all ethno-racial groups and not merely the majority one. Unfortunately, there has also been seen to be a bias in grading between ethno-racial groups. In a meta-analysis of numerous studies which included grading data, it was found that teachers tended to mark certain ethno-racial groups more harshly than others. The analysis showed that across all ethno-racial groups, teachers graded these minority students an average 0.26 of a standard deviation lower than Caucasian students. African American students in particular were graded an average 0.36 of a standard deviation lower. However, it was found that the use of rubrics and anonymity of students dropped this discrepancy of grading to 0.05 of a standard deviation, so there is a clear bias at play. While educational bias may often be unintentional, its effects are very real. There's a great need to ensure our students are treated equitably by making sure that the tests we use do not disadvantage certain students due to cultural or linguistic differences. Additionally, we need to ensure that all of our students are held to the same standards without fear of grading bias.